Thank you for being here. Today's workshop is The Talking Circle by Curt Shuey. Curt Shuey followed his parents' stories to Alaska in 1978, accompanied by his wife, Deb. They've lived and worked in various situations around the Kenai and Western Alaska since then. A growing interest in the way we work through our differences with others led to study and an MA in consultation and conflict resolution, and eventually his current work. With much training, mentoring, and support, he coordinated the Kenaitze Tribal Circle since 2007 and has had the privilege to serve over 200 talking circles for those hoping to work through difficult or meaningful things together in a good way. To respond to increasing requests from various communities, organizations, and agencies for circle and circle keeper training, assistance with circle program development, and circle facilitation, he started Circle Alaska Consulting in January of 2020. Without further ado, this is Curt Shuey.
Thanks so much, Erin. It's always a pleasure for me to be able to talk about circles with groups of people who are interested in learning more about them and about putting them to use possibly in their work and in their lives. I very much appreciate the invitation to do this and all of the assistance with this particular conference and setting it up. It's been very helpful. I'm going to, because we have roughly an hour or a little less to talk about this or to present this, and I want to cover a fair amount of stuff there. I am going to rely on a PowerPoint to go through that and keep from getting sidetracked. But at the end of it, we're going to, as Erin mentioned, there'll be time for people to ask questions, to share their own thoughts or experiences with circles, plans for maybe using circles going ahead. And that's always a rich time, I think, to share with each other in that way what we're hoping to do. So without any further delay, then I'll attempt to share my screen here. While I'm presenting, I think I'll do as many of you are doing and stop my video just in order to preserve bandwidth and hopefully have as smooth a presentation as possible. So let me see here what I can share. Bear with me while I get this started. Erin, what are you seeing at this point?
I'm seeing your slides. I think you just still need to switch into presenter view.
Okay, I think I'm going to share a different screen.
There we go. That looks great.
Okay, now let me see. Are you still seeing the same single slide, Erin?
Yep, it looks like it's in
Very good.
presenter view and ready to go.
Very good, thank you. So I'm going to stop my video here. All right. So one thing I learned from a native elder who was, we were working together once on a different training regarding circles. And when he began to speak, he started out by acknowledging that in any group like this, it's a diverse group. We're going to have differences in culture, in upbringing, in age. We're going to see things differently and understand things differently. And so in this presentation, I'm bound to say and do some things in ways that do not fit with your understanding of things, with your sense of, oh, the proper way to do things, the proper way to speak, etc. So I just want to acknowledge this up front, to apologize for anything that others might find offensive, and to assure you that that's not my intention going forward. So. I'm having trouble advancing my slide right now. There we go. Oh, this quote here in front of you now is one that was from Peter Kalifornsky, a Dena'ina elder in the place that I live, Kenai, Alaska. And I'll just let you read that. As you read it, I'll just mention that no one living in this time invented the circle or created the circle. It has an ancient history to it. What will be shared here has come from others and what has been learned along the way, in the hope that you can make use of it. In this short time, I'll be talking about some of the basic principles and practices of the circle. My good friend Phil Burdick, who I think is on with us right now, will be discussing some practical skills for community building, learned from his extensive experience applying the circle in a school setting. You're invited to take whatever you learn here and change it in a way that makes sense for your people and in your circumstances. I continue to do this myself as I work with circles. The circle is an ancient tradition found in various forms in indigenous cultures around the world, based on the understanding that in whatever setting we find ourselves, we're one people. We're like a house, for instance, or a car. When all of the parts of that house or car are put together and are working well, the house keeps us warm and dry, the car takes us places and brings us back. But when one of the parts is not in good shape or is not connected with the others in the right way, we are in trouble and we need to make things right. As individuals, we're like those different pieces that make up a house or a car. We need to do our part, and we need to fit together with those around us in a good way so that our family, our village, and our people will thrive. So peacemaking circles go by, or circles in general, talking circles go by a lot of different names or titles, sometimes depending on how they're used. So peacemaking circles are often used where there's tension or conflict. Justice circles where some harm has been done and needs to be made right. Healing circles. I should have said healing circles where some harm has been done, and justice circles maybe where there's been a violation of some kind. There's grieving circles where there's been a great loss. Decision-making circles where there's just something important to decide or to plan. Celebration circles where, something wonderful needs to be commemorated. Use of the circle is expanding, and there's becoming more and more demand for presentations like this and trainings in how to develop and begin a circle program in an area. So the circle is becoming more familiar in current times through outreach, but also through volunteer participation in wherever circles are happening. And other individuals are invited to take part in those circles and learn about it in that way. Because it's grounded in a worldview that's not prominent in these times, the concept can be hard to grasp sometimes without experiencing it. And frankly, what it's like to be in a circle can be challenging to describe to someone. So if you ever have the chance to participate in a circle with people, I would encourage you to do that because you can get so much more a sense of it in that way. So people come to the circle through, they're often used by tribes, and people are referred by tribes sometimes. Schools have used circles from time to time, either within their own program or relying on a community circle in their area to utilize for different purposes. State justice referrals, the state court system and juvenile justice system has really expanded their referrals to circles where they exist, to take it out of the standard state approach to violations and law breaking. Health services are making more use of circles. Social services as well, where people come looking for help of some kind or another, and it becomes apparent that the family or individual could benefit from the kind of communication that we hope to create in a circle. Families, as they become aware of it, make requests for circles where they're available. And also as people become more familiar with what a circle can do, individuals will oftentimes refer themselves or ask for a circle for themselves when they're going through a time that could benefit from that. This slide shows various figures intended to represent people, represent us as individuals, each of us dealing with our own particular cares and concerns. So as you look at these figures, you can see, that one in the lower left looks like they've got an x-ray, maybe something medical, but it also shows that maybe they have a broken heart in there too. So another person next to him is in the doghouse for some reason or another. Upper right, the person feels like they're under a cloud. Life just isn't going their way. The person in the upper left is always concerned about time, getting things done, not enough time. So you see all these people dealing with their own particular concerns. The current reality is that we tend to keep our focus on ourselves in many situations and on our own personal interests. This naturally puts us in frequent conflict with others, tending to their own lives. In this way, we don't see a lot of them anymore, but in the old carnivals, if you've ever seen a situation where they had the bumper cars at a carnival, where each person gets in their own little car and then they run around bumping into each other. And that's kind of the way we act when we're in this mindset is we act like bumper cars, constantly getting in each other's way, going here and there, but making little progress, more chaotic situation. Another habit we've developed is grouping ourselves together with others. So this is a slide showing, our circle of attention kind of focused on ourselves. But another habit we've developed is grouping ourselves together with others that we agree on a particular subject, and then setting ourselves against those who see things differently. For instance, in the workplace, labor unions in one circle versus management in another circle, or in the political life that we have now. One of these groups could be Republicans, one could be Democrats, another one could be Libertarians or nonpartisan, banding together in our little groups and then going to battle with each other. There's lots of other examples. There's racial or ethnic groups. There's religious faiths. You could have different age groups or gender in this. If you think about it, it's a pretty common phenomenon in our society of people joining in groups and then being in conflict with others. So as before, conflict's inevitable in this scenario. So to move past conflict, in the circle, we strive to bring about a mindset or a worldview where we each see ourselves as part of a greater whole, in which each of us has an effect on and a responsibility for everyone else. In this scenario, there's no outgroup. There's no individuals looking out for number one, no us versus them. In this way, we spend our energies on learning, growth, and progress, instead of wasting it on opposition and conflict. I want to pause here for a moment and just check. I guess I'll ask Erin, are you hearing me okay? Is this coming across all right?
Yep, it's all great, Curt.
Very good, thank you. So a question here is this concept of unity, coming together. Where do you draw your circle? At the beginning, it was drawn around ourselves as an individual. And then in that middle one where we form into groups and then go to battle with each other, it's a limited sense of unity. And it's interesting that you hear often in those groups like labor unions or political parties, where they emphasize very much the importance of all being together, all working together, but only within their limited group. So when we move into this kind of a mindset where there isn't any outgroup, that's where unity becomes so productive and useful to us. To help bring this about, in almost all circles, and circles, take on a different look depending on where they're happening and who's helping to put them together to facilitate them. But almost always, people talk about guidelines for how they want to be together in this circle. So it's common to discuss and agree to guidelines at the beginning of a circle before jumping into whatever the subject matter is for that particular gathering. This can be done in a variety of ways, sometimes asking the group for their suggestions for how to behave, sometimes offering tried and true guidelines that have been handed down over the years from the past experience of others. So, but in any case, these guidelines are drawn from core values in a people, in a place, that have been found to be helpful. wherever circles are used. So they may take different forms, but the principles behind the guidelines are similar from culture to culture. Some of these principles are mentioned or are offered here in the center of this diagram. Things such as truthfulness, respect, love and care for each other, trusting each other. I'll mention here this oftentimes people come to circles under difficult circumstances and maybe trust has been broken. So they don't necessarily come in trusting each other, but trust is still a central principle, something that is worked on, worked to repair, to develop in the circle. It mentions honor at the bottom, acting with honor, treating others honorably, taking responsibility for your part in things, even if it didn't directly involve you. What's your part in things? And it mentions humility there, the idea that that as individuals, when we share in circles, to recognize that the things that I'm sharing, the ideas I'm sharing, aren't necessarily the way things are in reality. They're just the way I see them. And that goes for everyone else. And they're important to share, but not with the idea that anyone that sees it differently is somehow wrong. Or if there's ideas for how to make plans or how to move forward in a good way, not having the sense that my ideas are the best ideas and everyone else should just get in line and follow those. But a central principle that I've already talked about earlier is this idea of unity. It's the sense of that when we're here together in this community, and particularly in this circle, that we're a single body, and each of us as individuals makes up a part of that body, just as your feet, your kidney, your eye are all parts of your physical body, but they're not the same. You know, they have different roles, different functions. It's not about everybody being the same or thinking the same, but it's about everybody thinking and acting for the good of the body, with the good of the whole body in mind. So again, this is not something that's always the case here, but it's something we work to develop and to enhance in the circle. So I'll take these circles, these balls around the central principles are common guidelines, commonly used in circles. At the top, it mentions to honor the talking piece. Probably many of you are familiar with the idea of a talking piece in a circle, some object that is chosen and is passed around the circle with the idea that only the person holding it should speak. This helps to ensure the ability for everyone to share, whether they tend to be quiet. And also it's kind of self-limiting that when someone's holding the talking piece, if there's someone who talks easily and often in groups, that this is a reminder that no one else is going to be saying anything while you're holding the talking piece. So to maybe say what you have to say, but then stop and pass it on so that others also have an opportunity to do so. So that's the idea of the talking piece, that only the person holding it should speak. Moving around clockwise there, another guideline for the circle that's commonly heard is to speak from the heart, to say what you really think and what you really feel, and not necessarily what people want to hear. Oftentimes in circles, what we have to say is something that can be difficult. It can be something that you might think that others aren't going to agree with this, or it could be something very personal and embarrassing even. But if it's part of what's being discussed there, it's important to share those things so that we can all learn from each other. And of course, speaking from the heart would require honesty and oftentimes courage, and again, humility. But paired with that one, the next guideline says to speak in a good way. So speaking from the heart maybe has to do with what we have to say. Speaking in a good way has to do with how we say it, to choose your words carefully, to not hide things or avoid talking about something, but to say what needs to be said in an easy way, in a soft way, as soft a way as you can. Not to be in attack mode with your words or to be hurtful or to try to manipulate others with what you're saying. So this can be a challenge, and it can be a balancing act for us, but speaking in a good way makes it easier for others to not put up their defenses and to be able to take in what you're saying and maybe let it affect their thinking, maybe consider it instead of just rejecting it outright because they're feeling attacked. And of course, in virtually all talking circles, most of our individual time is spent listening to others rather than talking. So listening in a good way is another key guideline that helps support these principles. Listening to learn and to understand rather than listening to object or listening to form your own reply when your turn comes. But to just set aside those kind of thoughts while someone else is speaking and to just take in what they have to say, to think about why do they feel the way they do? Why do they understand things this way? What's been their life experience and background that leads to this kind of thinking? So now it's important to recognize that understanding as best you can what someone else is saying does not require that you agree with them. This doesn't mean giving up your own thoughts and ideas, but just to take in someone else's, to expand our thinking in that way. A couple more guidelines here, continuing around, to remain in the circle, to make a commitment to the circle until everyone agrees to stop. You know, quite honestly, circles are often not easy. They're not comfortable places to be. Oftentimes they're used to discuss difficult matters. And so there can be a lot of emotion in circles. Emotions are appropriate. There can be fear. There can be tension in circles. And what this one is saying is, regardless of how things are going or how I'm feeling, I'm committed to stay here with this group and to keep working and talking about this until we all decide to stop. And that doesn't mean we can't take a pause. That, you know, this can be exhausting sometimes. It can be helpful to take a break, to take a walk, to get a cup of coffee or whatever, just to have a little downtime. And that's fine. The group can also decide whenever it chooses that, you know, we've given this a try and we just don't want to do it anymore. And we're ready to be done. If the group decides that together, that's fine. They can end when they decide to end. What this one is mainly saying is, as an individual, I'm not going to get up and walk out on this process because someone said something I disagree with, or I just don't like it anymore. So, and then lastly, what's said in the circle should stay in the circle. This is commonly adopted in circles as well. And this is a way that we can demonstrate our trustworthiness to each other. We can also help others to feel a little bit more at ease to speak from the heart, to share what they really think and feel. If they have some confidence that what the others hear, they hear from them, they aren't going to spread around the village, the town, the workplace, even their families at home and their friends, that we don't share others' stories, what others have had to say here, without their permission. Of course, a circle may make plans that they want to share or need to share in some way, and, you know, things like that, that they agree together on. That's fine. But this basically says that we avoid gossip and backbiting regarding what other individuals have shared in our circle. So once a circle keeper with the group has talked about guidelines, and people have made suggestions. I mean, even if a circle keeper offers these guidelines, for instance, these common tried and true guidelines, it's good then to ask everyone there, how do you feel about these? Do you have other guidelines you would like to add? Or are there any of these that you don't think are appropriate for what we're about to do? Any changes you would like to make? What you're doing here is letting the people in the circle recognize that the circle belongs to them, that there's no leader in the circle. There's no, the circle keeper doesn't have authority. The circle keeper is not going to impose guidelines, but they offer them and see what people think. And commonly people recognize the good in these guidelines, the helpfulness. And, you know, if everyone agrees, once everyone agrees on these guidelines or whatever they discuss and come up with, as long as they all agree and they're ready to adopt those, then you're ready to move forward. That bottom bullet point there about self-awareness, the circle keeper is not the enforcer of these guidelines, even after they've been adopted. The guidelines work best when each person in the circle takes it upon themselves to follow them as best they can, as best they understand, and not to think so much about how you think someone else in the circle is doing, whether you thought they were speaking from the heart or whether you feel they're listening in the right way, to try to avoid judging other people in the circle that way, but just to keep the attention on yourself, the focus on yourself of how am I doing with these? It's really an invitation for everyone to be the best version of themselves while they're in the circle together. I know that questions may come up, and I encourage you to just keep those in mind or jot them down, and hopefully we'll have a good time at the end of this to discuss things you may be wondering about. So adopting these guidelines and entering this circle mindset, the sense of unity, how does this change our behavior when we're there with others? What effect does it have on them? So here's a few thoughts in that regard. First of all, they can lead people to pause rather than to react and consciously consider their words and actions, to think before they speak. Maybe not so common in our day-to-day lives. You know, we tend to be in reactive mode quite often. This is kind of a way to turn off the autopilot, and fly this plane ourselves intentionally and thoughtfully. To look for the greater good, freed from narrow self-interest. Remember the circles around the individual versus the circles around the entire group. To think in that way of what's good for all of us together. To let go of the belief that they're right. And I talked about this idea of humility earlier. To try first to understand others and then to be understood. The order of this can have an important effect that, not everyone is able to be on the top of their game as they're together and trying to follow these guidelines. Some people might become very upset or something and kind of lose track of trying to understand others. But if someone else around them is reacting to them, doing their best to understand how they feel, that can help diffuse things, that can help calm things and make it easier for them to get back into trying to understand everyone else as well. So if we each attempt to take it on ourselves to first be understanding of others and then worry about helping others to understand us, that can be very beneficial. To look for the truth, the good way going forward, instead of the way they want things to be. We don't always want the best things, particularly if we're in that individual thinking mode. So a lot of these are related to each other, and this is another one that's related to that sense of unity. What's a good way forward rather than what's in it for me? To share useful and relevant information. I've often said in circles that being in a circle is kind of the opposite of being in a poker game, where people hide their cards to themselves and try to figure out how best to win this contest with the others around them. In the circle, your cards, which are how you see things, how you understand things, your ideas for going forward. We lay those cards out for everyone else to see and to learn from. And they do the same, and we learn from their information, what they know, how they see it. And in that way, together we build a more complete and accurate view of whatever it is that we're there to talk about. To avoid giving offense or taking offense. So when we're talking, when we're interacting with others, to do the best we can to not be offensive in our actions and our words. And when others are talking, in spite of how they may do things differently, how they may come from a different culture that, uses eye contact in a different way, or tone of voice is different, that we try to give them a pass, and we try to avoid taking offense, even if they're doing something that would normally feel offensive to us. The neat thing about this is that it's not dependent on others. It's up to me to avoid doing my best to avoid being offensive to others. It's up to me to avoid taking offense at what others do, which helps to keep the conversation peaceful and constructive. Not always easy, I recognize, on all of these. Related to it, to monitor their own behavior and not the behavior of others. Kind of like I mentioned earlier about adopting the guidelines. Adopt them for yourself, and don't try to avoid getting in judgmental mode where you're critical of how everyone else around you is doing. to encourage the positive qualities of others and overlook their faults. Recognizing that each of us, all of us as individuals, have good qualities and also have faults, things that are not our strengths, habits that are not so helpful sometimes. And what this tells us is that with others, recognize that they'll make mistakes. They'll do things that are difficult to handle sometimes. And if we can do our best to overlook those and focus on their positive qualities, that enhances our relationships with them, enhances, again, our ability to work together constructively. One way to think about this is it's kind of the way that you would think about a best friend that, even if you meet them during the day and they tend to be grouchy or they don't seem to pay much attention to you that way, if they're a good friend, you probably recognize that, hey, maybe something's happened in their day that's made it hard for them. Maybe their mind is preoccupied with something else. So we give them a pass. We tend to give them a pass. Whereas with people that we are not friendly with, maybe even consider an adversary or an enemy, we tend to do just the opposite. Even if they treat us politely and considerately, we tend to think, okay, what are they up to? What do they want this time? Or something like that. So this is one way to think about this, just to treat everyone as if they were a good friend and overlook the difficulties we all carry with us. And last on this list is if you're in a circle that's making a decision, making plans, that when a final agreement is made, to when you go out and you leave that circle, to support it fully, even if as an individual I have I'm not completely on board with it. I have some disagreement with it, but as a group, it was the best that we felt we could come up with. So I'm not going to go out and suddenly start undermining this. This is something you see in politics all the time. People go to battle, a vote is taken, something passes or doesn't pass, and then as soon as they walk out, they're immediately continuing the battle. If something went ahead that they didn't like, they undermine it, they work to undermine it, they try to come back sometime later and have another vote that completely changes it again. And in that way, you never know if a final decision is actually going to be productive or useful, because it never gets enacted well, because people are undermining it. Okay, I don't want to spend too much more time on this, but I spent a lot of time talking about the philosophy and principles behind circles, which are really the basis of circles. So let's take a look now at some of the nuts and bolts of how a circle can happen. And again, these take different forms in different places and different cultures. And like I said before, feel free to adjust it and change it to fit any use you might put it to. But well, again, just passing along things that I've learned from others and from my own experience with this. These are stages that a circle might go through, building from the bottom of the pyramid, going up. As people in it talk with each other about something important, generally working from that opening basis there. It's common that people coming to a circle will hope to have something good come out of this effort, even if they disagree on many things. So like it says to the right of that opening layer there, strengthening a unity of purpose. Generally, if people come to a circle, regardless of what they disagree on, they're hopeful that something good can come from this, something moving ahead in a good way. So they already have a unity of purpose. And in this opening, Typically, there's people welcome each other. We talk about the guidelines, like I just did, and it's a wherever the long history of circles have built a tradition. Part of that tradition is spiritual preparation to understand that the Creator, to ask the Creator to be with us in this effort to bless our work going forward. Now, with all of the diversity in the world at this time coming together, even in the same community, a diversity, there's many different ways of understanding this, understanding spirituality. So this isn't an attempt to get everyone to believe the same thing or understand this in the same way. But it's also something that it's good not to leave out, to have some way in here for the individuals involved and the group itself to prepare itself spiritually for what they're about to do. So what we'll often do is just ask people to share something, if they care to ask them if they'd like to share something that's inspirational to them. And it can be a song, a dance, it can be drumming, it can be a prayer, a favorite passage or writing. It can even be a thought, whatever they choose. You can also use a few moments of silence here for individuals to prepare themselves to go forward in this discussion and following the guidelines they've agreed to as best they can. Following this, then we usually begin the circle with introductions, although people may have introduced themselves to each other as they've come together in the gathering. This is a time where we first pass the talking piece, asking each individual to say who they are, because it's common in circles to have people who haven't necessarily met or don't know each other, but also to say why they chose to be there, why they chose to take part in this circle. And we'll pass this around, listening to everyone. And when they're finished, you can pretty much hear in what people have said, you can hear what I talked about earlier of this unity of purpose, that whatever brought them there together, each of them individually has some hope or intention to somehow move ahead in a good way. So then we're ready to move into that next level of sharing our story of, okay, what is it we're here to talk about now? What do I understand of this? What's happened? Not just the facts, but how do I feel about it? What have the consequences been for me or for others? So we'll go around the circle again in this way and let people share. And when it comes around, the talking piece comes around again, we'll often send it around a second time, because a lot of times, people will initially share whatever they had on their mind coming in. But then as they listen to each other and their understanding of the situation expands, they have additional thoughts, new thoughts that come to mind. So we ask them to share that, and we may go around even more times. It just depends on the situation. And if it starts to feel like people have said everything they need to say at that point, what we're doing here is we're trying to all get on the same page, not meaning we necessarily agree with each other, but we've all heard from each other and have a more complete understanding of the story. And then if it's a kind of circle that is trying to deal with something, we might be ready to move forward into saying, what do we do about this? So in that stage I just mentioned, we came in at the beginning with a unity of purpose. In this stage, we're building a unity of understanding, getting on the same page. Now we may be ready to move forward in building a unity of action. We've had this good discussion. We've got a fuller picture. Now, what do we do? What do we do about this? So we can go around, each of us offering our own ideas on actions that could be taken, what we ourselves could be doing, what we could do as a group. And these ideas can be wild and crazy even. They don't have to feel completely reasonable. It's just a free sharing of our ideas and thoughts about what to do. But after doing that, now, how do we come together as this single body to agree on a plan? So we start looking at what everyone else has shared, what we've shared, where there's similarities and where there's differences, and we work to mold this into a plan. We can combine things, we can leave some things out, whatever the group wants to do with this or feels is best to do. And the aim here is to come up with something that everyone can agree to go forward with. Now, there's every chance in the world that any plan coming out of this isn't going to exactly match any one individual's ideas, any one individual's sense of what the perfect plan would be. But as a group, it feels like something that is the best that we can all come up with and agree with together. So as I mentioned before, it's important coming out of here that if even one person says, I don't like this, or I don't like one part of this, we ask, what would you change to make it better? And then we keep going around listening to everyone, and plans develop and grow in this way till it reaches a point where everyone says, I can live with this. At the very least, I can live with this. And once you reach that point, then you can move into closing the circle. And usually what we'll do at this point is we'll set the time to come back together to review progress on the plans we made. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. But what also might happen here is we become exhausted and we feel like we just can't all come together on a plan. We can't all find agreement here. And the circle can decide either to stop and come back together at a later time and work on it some more, or they can say, we gave it a good try and we're done. We're not going to use this process anymore. In either case, you move into closing. Yeah, if you did agree on a plan, then people share their commitments. They often share gratitude with each other as you have a closing round. And, they might reflect a bit about the circle process itself. How did it feel to come together in this way? How are you feeling at this point? So I should mention before going on that some circles come together just to talk with each other in a good way, just to improve communication and strengthen connections. It's kind of like a tune-up on the car or spring cleaning for the house that I was talking about earlier. Maybe there aren't any other actions to be taken in these circles. One example would be like a grieving circle where maybe someone has passed away and you want to use a circle as a memorial service. You're not necessarily going to make plans for action after that, Maybe you just go through the first two stages. You just have the opening with each other, and then everyone has a sharing. So it can stop there. But I've taken you through the full process of a decision-making circle, something where there's something to decide there. If you do have come to an agreement, have a follow-up circle, these typically look like this, where you have the welcome, you remind each other of the guidelines you adopted earlier. You have something inspirational, again, to offer something that feels inspirational there to prepare yourselves. And then you just review the plan, review progress on the decisions that were made at the opening circle. And people can ask questions during this for questions to clarify, what's happened or what hasn't happened. And at that time, after that's complete, then the talking piece can be started around for comment. This usually takes the form of appreciation for progress made, encouragement, offers help with things yet to be done, or suggestions for changing the plan in some way. And this can go around several times if necessary. If there's still more to be done on the plans that were made, a date for another follow-up circle can be chosen, and the circle is closed as before. If at that point there's a consensus that the circle's work is finished, that the plans it made have been completed to everyone's satisfaction, it closes as before, but for the final time. And a celebration might be held or some way to commemorate that success. So, although it's not that complicated, circles are not that complicated, they also can be very challenging. They aren't necessarily easy to do. So why go to this effort? Why do this? So although the circle has these ancient roots, ancient traditional roots, and this way of talking with each other in this day and age has really become rare, particularly when we see things differently. We've created a culture of conflict, and our autopilot has kind of been programmed for that. So we get in reactive mode. Sometimes we're so submerged in this culture that we don't even imagine that there's any other way to deal with things. And we aren't even interested in having a better working relationship with others sometimes. So doing things differently is hard. And until we reprogram ourselves, it'll take much conscious attention and commitment. So why bother to do this? So here's a few reasons. When these principles are taken to heart and plans and decisions become more informed, because all relevant information is sought out and considered without being individually biased about it. Again, none of these things are perfect, but to the extent we take this to heart and put these principles to action, this is what can come. Decisions are more creative because participants are freed from protecting limited positions and narrow self-interest. They can consider other ways. They're more universal because everyone is valued and included. There's no outgroup. It's not just the big talkers that make all the decisions. They're more effective because decisions are fully supported by the decision makers. They're developmental because plans can be easily modified and adapted as new information or changing conditions become known. When you come to these follow-up circles, if you find that there's some problem with the plans that we made, the group is free to change those. And using the same process before, making changes that everyone thinks are a good idea. And because of all of this, the decisions are more sustainable. So you're not back at some later time having the same old arguments that have been had before, rehashing the same things. So at that point, here's a few reference links that I've shared. This book, Peacemaking Circles from Conflict to Community, is something that was shared with me early in my learning years ago about peacemaking circles. It was shared with me by a Kenaitze elder who picked it up at a conference he was attending at some time, and it's become a very dog-eared go-to reference for much of my learning and practice of circles. And that's published by the Living Justice Press. If you Google or search Living Justice Press, things on restorative justice and circles are just about their entire lineup of books and offerings that they have. They're a small company. They have they have several good resources for use of circles in the schools, etc., in governance, things like that. They also, at the same website, they have some graphics and handouts if you have uses for those. And Justice as Healing Indigenous Ways is another one of the books that they offer on their website. But there's many others as well. This is just a sampling. So I'm not sure where we are time-wise, but I think we're at a time where we can hopefully have a little discussion about this. I'm going to stop sharing. While I've been presenting, I haven't been paying attention to the chat. So I'll try to start my video again. Invite you all to start your video if you care to. And
Curt, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and expertise. It's very awesome to hear about. There wasn't a ton going on in the chat. I think everyone was listening very intently. Lots of great information to take in. Joe shared a link to that Justice Press website. I am going to put the evaluation link in the chat box. Remember to do that evaluation to be entered into the door prizes today. And I think, yeah, let's open it up to discussion and some Q&A. We can either come off mute to ask questions, or we'll keep an eye on the chat. Curt, I have a question we can start off with. What is maybe one of the more unique groupings of people or occasions that you've facilitated circles for? Like you listed, there's greeting circles and different kinds, but what would you say is one people wouldn't normally think of, or maybe a group of people that people wouldn't normally think of doing a circle with that you've facilitated?
well, there's one. If some of you are from tribes or other organizations that have a governing body, I initially worked for the Kenaitze tribe. Actually, up until just a few months ago, I worked for the Kenaitze tribe developing their circle program for the last 14 years. And it wasn't until about year 13 that the tribal council invited me to talk to them about circles and how they might use circles in their work. And, I waited a long time for that, but people don't tend to think of it in that way, that circles can be a wonderful way for decision-making bodies, whether it's committees, whether it's, administrators of a program, whatever the program might be. These bodies exist to make important decisions. And I think the circle is just an ideal way to have a thorough discussion that includes all the voices there. And it's not just a few people in authoritative positions, making those decisions. I know Phil, who will be talking later today, has extensive experience using circles in school settings, I believe in different ways. So I would encourage you all to attend that and to pick his brain about those experiences. I'll tell you another thing we did is the Kenaitze tribe has grown to a point where they have a human resources department and over 300 employees. And a few years ago, they adopted the circle as part of their grievance process, where an employee may feel they want to file a grievance, and they're provided the opportunity to come to a circle first, where they could work things out. The people involved in the situation can work things out together in a good way, rather than taking it to a grievance where someone in authority, very much like a court, judge-like, listens to the situation and then makes decisions, and others have to follow on that. We've used circles in child in need of aid cases. Determining placement for a teenager or children, the circles that involve foster parents, biological parents, aunties and uncles that come together to talk about placement of a child. And if the child is of a certain age, oftentimes they will participate themselves. I've had teenagers participate and have their equal voice in talking about their placement. So that's just, I've had staff groups come to me to hold circles just to improve their relations in the staff, their working relations with each other, where sometimes tensions have rose. So it's not always justice or court-related things. It's not always conflict-related. And as I mentioned before, there's been some times where circles have been used in memorial services, things like that. So that's just as it becomes more familiar in a place, in a community, people find more and more uses for it. Honestly, lots of families have learned about circles, been in circles, and then taken it home and say, we want to use this as a family at home. That's some of the most rewarding that I hear, is when a family simply wants to adopt this for themselves. I encourage anyone to just unmute and shout out a question or a thought or your own experiences with circles, or how you might hope to use circles. Or you can use the reaction button to raise your hand if you like.
I have a question. Okay, I work with the smaller people, and I'm just down the road from you. I'm in Kenai. I work with small people at school, kindergarten to 5th grade. Would a circle discussion be an appropriate place to deal with like a behavior issue, like 2 boys fighting on the playground? Would convening a circle to discuss it be a productive use of my time with kids that young, or do you think it would just collapse into disaster?
Well, I see a thumbs up from Phil right away. And I would encourage you to jump in here, Phil. I will say that with Kenaitze, one of the first things we did in our early years is we introduced the circle in their Head Start program, which is, 3 to 5-year-olds at the time. And they take so naturally to it. you know, I wouldn't start out there with first times sharing the concept of a circle. I wouldn't start out with some difficult situation, but just something easily like, how was your week? How was your weekend? You know, you come back to school on a Monday or something. How was your weekend? And get them used to passing the talking piece and just one talking at a time and things like that. But then I think they can be very surprising in how they can work through some challenging things as well. A lot of times they take to it easier than adults do. Absolutely. It's a rather natural process, I think, for young people. Phil, feel free to jump in here. I know you'll have some time later as well, but.
Yeah, I don't want to steal all my thunder for this afternoon, and should definitely come to my session. I was worried about a Friday afternoon session. But yeah, young people in schools, I did a restorative circle with some fifth graders who had done some harm in the community, and it was really the only way that we were going to get to a good result. I might talk about that a little bit later, but I think the one thing about it to caution is that, you know, it would be not the whole class, it would just be the students who were involved. And basically my talk this afternoon is going to be about, you can't restore what you haven't already built. And so Curt's comment about really starting your year, or starting your, you know, lots of elementary schools have morning meetings, and you can run morning meeting in circle protocol, and get it set up in that way, and just have it be a part of everyone's, you know, natural day.
What I love about your question, Carol, is that anyone who can introduce circles to people at a young age, if and when difficult times come to them as a teenager or a young adult or something, and a circle is there, it won't be such a strange animal to them. It'll be something they have some familiarity with, and an additional layer of comfort to turn to in those situations.
All right, before we run out of time here, there's one more question in the chat box. Jessica asks, ideally, does speaking in the circle pass from person to person in the order of the circle, or does it make more sense to jump around who's speaking next? We got about a minute to share.
So my experience with that, and I've seen it both ways, and even as a circle keeper, you can talk about passing it around, but sometimes someone in the circle will jump up and grab it. You know, usually people follow the guidelines pretty well, but you're not in control, you know, so anything can happen. But the danger in it bouncing around is it tends to go to someone who wants to speak and has something to say. And that tends to gravitate towards the same thing we see in our typical discussions now, where it's the same people who do all the talking, and the quieter ones don't have a chance. And even if people don't feel like they're ready to speak, when the talking piece comes to them, oftentimes they will. I remember closing one circle. I said, I just asked the question, does anyone else have anything they want to share? And nobody did. And I said, well, let's just pass the talking piece one last time, just see what happens. Every single person had something to say when that talking piece came to them. So answering your question, first of all, I wouldn't dictate anything. I don't dictate anything, but I would certainly encourage going in order and letting people learn patience to wait until it comes to them to share what they have to share. Thank you.
Thank you again for presenting today. If people have more questions, you can either use our online platform to message Curt, or you can ask questions on our forum. I put the evaluation link in the chat one more time. Thanks for coming, everybody.